Peace, y'all. Quick update. NASA and I went through some pretty massive technical difficulties going through this. There was internet connectivity issues. My mic fucked up. So, like, about a quarter of the way through, you're going to notice a lot of interruptions. It shouldn't be too bad, but, like, thank y'all for understanding. Love you. Mwah. What's good, y'all? My name is Dylan Green, and this is Real Notes, a space dedicated to blurring the cultural and artistic lines between rap and film. I'm here to chop it up with everyone from rappers and producers to journalists and video directors about their relationship to movies and how, if at all, film inspires their craft. My guest this week is New York rapper, producer, engineer, and label head Uncommon NASA. We spoke about Crime Scene Kitchen, Pinocchio, Basquiat, The Twilight Zone, several Stephen King film adaptations, the pros and cons of adapting books to film, his career in New York rap's underground and within the Definitive Jux orbit, the history of his label Uncommon Records, and the process behind his latest album, Only Child, produced entirely by Messiah Musik. Come fuck with us. COVID, like low key, this shit traumatized all of us. Like this is all just like a collective trauma that like we all experienced at the same time, and we're all gonna come out different from it. And like this is just kind of reminding me of that for some reason. Not to start this off on something too morbid, but like
it's fitting. I mean, look at who your guest is. So it's
man.
fitting to start with morbid topic trees. So it's all good.
But well, what's up? What's cracking? Welcome back to number. I don't know what number this is because we're actually recording it pretty early. So I didn't do the math. I didn't do the math in advance. So like I have a tendency to forget my episode numbers, but this one's just gonna be episode whatever the number is when it drops, because this is dropping in like early to mid-August.
Word up.
Welcome back, everybody. We're here with whatever number episode this is. Welcome back to Real Notes. I forgot to fucking say the name. I'm a fucking asshole. My name is Dylan, CineMasai. I got a lot of names, two of them right there. Um, you know, as I always say, every guest on this show is incredibly special, and this guy I got with me right here is somebody who's he's been making moves for a very, very long minute. This guy is a rapper and a producer, and he's an engineer. He's a label head. He's a creative. He's telling me about the fact that he just started painting, which I'm hoping we can get more into later. Like he's just like he's seen so many sides of this like rap shit that I can't even think to list them all here. And hopefully we'll be able to hit like half of them. We got Uncommon NASA in the place to be, the head of Uncommon Records, and just Mr. Man of Mischief over here. What's cracking,
Word up,
man?
man. Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here, man. That's a very healthy intro. I like that. Thank you.
That's beautiful.
Appreciate
Yeah,
that.
thank you for coming on my shit. I appreciate that. Like I don't take anybody who gives me their time for granted on here, so I
Word.
appreciate you even taking the time.
Word up.
Man. So let me ask you the first question I ask everybody who comes on this show. What's the last movie or TV show that you watched that you enjoyed?
Hmm. The last, I'm trying to think of like, something that's not like nonsense.
I mean, it could be
Something
nonsense if you want.
TV
It could
show
be
like,
whatever.
man, I'm sure that you don't want to hear me talk about my analysis of crime scene kitchens and whether it is valuable for entertainment. The last, you know what, real talk though, the last TV show episode that I watched, it's ongoing now, that I think it's just like such an awesome show. Is a show called Mr. Inbetween. I
I
love
don't think I
Mr.
know that one.
Inbetween. It's on FX. It's actually an Australian based show. But it's been on FX for 3 seasons now, and the first season has started. Well, the premise of the show is this guy. He's a hitman slash just criminal for hire, and he's also like, that's like his secret life, but he's also like raising like a young daughter at the same time. So the creativity of the show is like there's like all these like really touching comedic moments with his daughter, and then like the next scene is like this action scene where he's just shooting somebody in the face. And so like it's a really cool show. It's not American, so it's not like cheesy and shoved in there the way like a show like I just described can be sometimes. So it's really dope. The first season started as like sort of like vignettes along those lines, like 15-minute little things, and then the second season it became more of a story arc, and now the third season they're continuing that. It's really dope. That would be
That
the last thing that I would co-sign that I've seen. You know?
that sounds cool. I've never heard of that before. I'm not gonna lie, and I like to think I'm pretty tapped into what's going on at FX because they always have
Hmm.
really cool shit. But like, I
Yeah.
love I love stuff like that. That's really into. I love that kind of contrast. Just like
Hmm.
something that's like I don't know if you'd call it wholesome, but like something that's kind of just like family oriented, and then just like smashing into something that's completely not that. Like,
Even the family part of it is like I said, it's not like Americanized, like smashed into a package. Like it's not that comedic. Like there are like heartwarming parts and there are like depressing parts that don't have anything to do with the crime part of the show. There's like relationship stuff and coming of age stuff for the daughter, and it's pretty crazy. Like it's what they pull off, juxtaposition wise, is pretty incredible to me. It's definitely something to watch from the beginning. And the best thing about the show, as I suggested to people, it's half-hour show, so like
mm-hmm.
you could just binge the hell out of it. It's on Hulu, like so you could just blast through like a whole season in probably like 3 hours. So you know.
That's so dope. Like I really like short shows, and there are even like a handful that I've been watching lately that are like 10, 11 minutes. So you can like binge an
Mm,
entire season in like about the amount of time it would take to watch a movie, like a
yeah.
hundred, like an hour and 40 minutes. Like there's this really dope animated show on Cartoon Network, or I guess HBO Max technically, but it's called Infinity Train, and
Hmm.
each season is 10 episodes, and they're all 10 minutes long, and it's about this big. I think I've talked about it on the show before. It's this big train that like every train car is its own little world, and
Ah,
people
it's
get
cool.
people get people get brought on because they have some sort of like trauma or life issue they got to sort out. I Whenever I tell people about it, I call it like it's like a child friendly version of Saw. Like
It
it's
sounds almost like a cartoon version of Snowpiercer, that kind of
yeah,
thing, you know?
it's also definitely on that type of time too.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. It's definitely like a combination. It's like a child friendly combination of Saw and Snowpiercer. That's basically it, and it's dope. I think they just did the yeah. There were 4 seasons. The fourth and final season aired, I think, back in like May or April. No, April, because it came out on my dad's birthday. But yeah, it's dope, and that's really cool too. I just like it. I just like it when showrunners and people can respect an audience's time and not have to make them sit down for an hour and a half every time they want to watch an episode of a show. Like not everything needs to be a movie. Like that's cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
Man. So for you, NASA, like what's the first movie experience you can remember having, whether that was at the theater or if it was like at your cousin's house or like wherever? Like what's the first movie experience you can remember having?
Man, if I go all the way back, the first movie experience I remember having is I'm a child of the 80s. So during the 80s, they brought Pinocchio back to the theater.
Mm.
And the first time I ever saw Pinocchio was in a theater. I forgot which little friend I went with. My mom brought us. And I just remember the scene. I don't know if you've seen Pinocchio, or I haven't seen it in like
I
35
have.
years, but um, there's a scene right where he gets turned into a wolf or some shit.
It's a donkey. He gets
What's
turned
the
into a
what's the
donkey.
horrifying scene? Donkey gets turned into a donkey, and
Yeah.
that shit fucked me up for a while, man. Like I saw that when I was 6, and like that shit fucked me up, and that's probably my earliest movie memory. I mean, I could get into like my first favorite movies, that I came up on, but like, but in terms of like just the hazy, like, can barely function like first memory, that's definitely one of them. Like I don't remember really much else I mean, I remember the part where his nose grows and shit, like everyone else, but I don't remember much else about that movie besides it being
Yeah.
transformed brutally into a donkey. Like, you know.
Yeah, I think cuz I haven't seen it. I haven't seen it in like at least a decade, and like that's the part I remember. I remember Pinocchio getting swallowed by the whale,
Mm.
and maybe the first time the fairy godmother shows up. But like I haven't seen the movie in forever, and there've been like 80 different versions of Pinocchio too. Like that really you ever see the really terrible Italian one with the guy who won the Oscar for
I
um
remember seeing like posters and trailers for it. The Italian guy that won the Oscar and he jumped up on the table and all that.
uh-huh. Yeah, he
Yeah,
won for
yeah, yeah.
Life is Beautiful. That was the movie.
Right, right, right. Yeah.
That's such a sad movie. Wow, like it's ugh. It's a really great movie, and he has a really great performance in it. And then he followed that up immediately with that Pinocchio movie that everyone hated. Like it basically ruined his career. Like he
Hollywood got
never,
to him, man. Hollywood
man,
got to him.
he did not recover. It was real bad. Shout out to Roberto Benigni, that's his name. Shout out to him. I
Ah,
hope he's doing
shit.
okay. Shout out to him.
Word.
Damn. Talk to me about your like what would you say is the first movie that made you fall in love with the art of filmmaking? Like were you like really recognized like, oh shit, like this is art, or like this is something that resonates? Like
So there's two things I'll get into. I'll because I have one movie that I wanted to talk about in particular that like was the first movie and probably one of the only movies that truly impacted me and influenced me. And then there's another movie where I can talk about more about like starting to notice the art of filmmaking. That's a little more of an obvious one that everyone knows,
cool.
and even the first one is too. But to get into the question, like, um, I can remember watching Basquiat when I was 17, and when Basquiat first came out, that's the Jeffrey Wright acted one.
Right.
Julian Schnabel directed it, and the cast is amazing. It's like Willem Dafoe, Christopher Walken, Gary Oldman, David Bowie, Dennis Hopper, Courtney Love, Jeffrey Wright, as I said. I'm trying to think of all the different people that were in that movie. Benicio del Toro,
Yeah, that movie was star-studded
like
for sure.
William, let's go with the raspy voice.
Oh man. I
I
can't
just
remember.
Michael Winslet, I think is his name. He was amazing in it too. All that being said, man, like I was a kid that was really into music, that was probably sort of already on a path to getting into engineering. Before high school ended, I had already made up my mind that I was going to go to recording school at this place called Institute of Audio Research. I wasn't going to be going to college. It didn't make any sense financially or grade wise for me to do that.
Mm,
So I went to IR, and but before I went there, I had already decided that it was obvious that my path was in music and in art, but I didn't know how to like. I seemingly didn't know how to carry myself yet, as like an artist. Like I didn't understand the freedom that you got when you were an artist yet, because I was so young and used to school and structure and blah 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 rules. And when I watched Basquiat, I was young enough that I wasn't cynical about film, and I had no idea who Basquiat was. And to be honest, most of the mainstream world didn't know who Basquiat was for another 10 or 15 years, even after that movie was made. That movie was the beginning, obviously outside of his real life, Downtown 81, like those kinds of documentaries. But like
right.
in terms of him being a pop culture figure, that movie, the Julian Schnabel movie, was the beginning. It was the tip of the iceberg of him becoming sort of the icon that he is today, the
Wow.
posthumous icon that he is today.
Right. I never
Obviously,
thought
when he
about
was
that.
alive, he was celebrated in art circles. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah.
The same way like a lot of those other early 80s figures were. But in terms of him becoming like the guy whose logo is on a pair of sneakers and on a hoodie or whatever, like that started with this movie, with the Julian Schnabel
Yeah.
movie.
And
And
and on a Makami album cover too, because the
now,
Pray for
yeah.
Haiti cover, yeah.
Yeah. You know, it's I did, I've sampled that movie plenty of times. You know, they can't sue me enough times at this point. I know almost every line to that movie. I mean, it's amazing. And so watching the way that Jeffrey Wright, who by the way that was his first role, I think maybe in anything, but certainly as a lead. Um, and to me, it's still his best work. I mean, how amazing is it that a guy that accomplished, at least in my opinion, like could hit it so hard? I mean, he is Basquiat in that movie, you know,
Right.
like because I've seen, you know, since and again at the time, I didn't really know who Basquiat was. I probably had heard the name. You know, I'm 16, 17 years old in 1995.
6, I think.
You know,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
you know, so like how much do I know about Basquiat at that point? And so, you know, I hadn't seen him in real life, and I've since obviously seen him in plenty of real life interviews and documentaries and stuff. And like he just nails them so perfectly and put in such a great effort. And everyone in that movie did because, you know, I've come to find actually the guy, that's the reason why we're talking, me and my friend were talking about Michael Winslet recently. I think I'm saying that guy's name right. His character just passed away. Um, I don't know if I know his name in real life, but the guy who basically discovered Basquiat and, you know, put him in you know, some of his first shows that blew him up in the New York area, he just passed away. So we're losing like all these legendary people, you know, from that time period, which is unfortunate. But, you know, as I've gotten older, I've come to realize that like, you know, at a certain age you stop being told about history and you start to be existing with history. So
Yeah.
people will die around you that are famous, that are important to you. So that's just the way it is. But that film, man, just watching him the way that he carried himself, the way that he talked to people, the way that he dressed, everything was an immediate influence on me. And I had never seen a movie like that. I didn't take movies seriously until I saw that movie. I will say that. Like
Yeah.
I liked movies as much as anybody, you know, and I liked artsy movies. I grew up watching a lot of B movies. Like I grew up in the blockbuster, even the pre-blockbuster era, where like, you know, as a teenager, as a preteen, you're gonna go to the store and rent a stack of like VHS B movies, you know, like fucking Spookies and Bad Taste, and I can go on and on with really shitty movies that I grew up watching. But you know, then you get to a certain point in time where you watch it, you see a movie like Basquiat at a young age, like I did. It gave me this grounding that I think I still have today that a lot of people don't get, of understanding the plight of artists and identifying artists as people instead of as like these talented machines. Um, you know, I think a lot of times people equate artists, and I'm speaking of any kind of art form, whether it's a musician or a painter or whatever. They sort of equate artists with athletes, and athletes are people too. Don't get me wrong, but like there's a physical thing that happens with an athlete that, you know, an artist, it's almost always all mental, and you can't measure that. And this movie kind of broke me out of that cycle of like thinking that people are born, you know, talented or natural. You know, I had a big thing when I was a kid, I guess, where I thought that like if you were talented, it was because you were born talented. You know,
Hmm.
that I didn't have a concept of actually growing your talent and learning as you go. I believed into like the sucker version of the arts, which is like if you're not a child prodigy, you're probably fucked. And like, you know, and I don't know, man, Basquiat was a big part of me like identifying myself as an artist, even though I wasn't where I was gonna go, you know what I mean? Like talent wise, yet, you know, at that age. I knew that that's where I wanted to be, even though I was in a totally different form of art. Um, being, you know, making music and I was writing at the time and doing all that kind of stuff. You know, really at that time, like I didn't even know. I just knew that I was creative, but I don't really think I had a solid plan. And that's why I got into engineering, you know, because I knew I wanted to be around it. I knew I wanted to be involved in the music, but I didn't quite, I needed those years, you know, like from
Yeah.
18 to 21, 22 to figure it out. Like, well, where's my place as a creative? and I needed to be around creatives to figure that out. And that was sort of how I ended up doing that.
Wow. And it all started with this movie. That's pretty wild, all things
It
considered.
it it did. I mean, obviously there are other things involved,
Well, yeah, yeah,
but yeah, but
yeah.
but yes, this movie definitely opened my mind. Not just to the fact that movies could be that powerful, even like on the other side of the coin, like to I like I said, I didn't believe in movies. So this movie kind of opened my mind to movies being that impactful. Um, and in terms of art, I'll just talk briefly, like another really influential movie that grew with me over time is, this is something that everyone listening probably has seen, but The Shining is, you know, incredibly influential to me. I didn't, it's one of those movies you can watch as a thriller, and then you go back and you start to realize the amount of detail that's into the framing of the shots, the symmetrical nature of a lot of the shots, the designs. And when you read and watch more about Kubrick and the way that he made movies, and as much as I respect Kubrick, I haven't seen nearly enough of his films. But like seeing some people walking down the rows at a hotel, they're fucking captivating as hell. Like I mean, how much better of a movie can you get than that? That's art.
Yeah, totally. And like like Kubrick has kind of earned a reputation as someone who was really an exacting director, like almost to a fault sometimes. Like he would like really put his actors and people through the ringer in a lot of instances. But I think like I have I really enjoy watching The Shining, and like I really enjoy watching The Shining, and I kind of sort of have. Actually, no, I'm just gonna leave it at that. I really enjoy The Shining. I know
No,
I've
what you can say what you don't like about it. It's all good. Like what
um
is it?
uh I don't really even know because it's weird. Like I feel like my opinion on this movie always changes because I
Hmm.
talk to so many people who have so many different opinions about it, and all of it just kind of like seeps into my brain
Hmm.
because like I enjoy it. I think it's really well shot. I think it has some of the most iconic images in all of horror and pretty much all of like cinema in general. Um, but it took me watching Doctor Sleep, the new joint, to
Hmm.
really I I haven't seen The Shining in a long enough time that I need to go back and revisit it before I can say this 100% confidently. But Doctor Sleep kind of grabbed me more than the original Shining did in a
I
few
have not
ways.
I have not seen Doctor Sleep yet. I will say that I really and I'm not a person that has actually read Stephen King's books, but I do appreciate Stephen King's work and his ability to create worlds with stories that sort of just. I think Stephen King's ability, even just watching the films alone, to sort of create worlds that didn't exist before is kind of unprecedented, at least at the mainstream level that he has reached.
And definitely at that point in his career too, because
Right.
yeah.
But the thing about King lately is his hell-bent nature of like remaking the films himself and being so heavily involved in the filmmaking process. It's just like, I mean, I will use this example. Like the original is long because it was made for TV, so
Mhm.
it was made for several nights. That's the one gripe I have with it. But the imagery and the acting and the casting and the look of that is incredible. Um, and the new It is horrible. It's just jump scare
Oh
bullshit.
man. I really
So
like the
like
first one. The second one isn't as good, but I really like it part one.
I didn't see the second one because the first one was so disappointing for me. It's a lot of jump scares and a lot of sort of knockoff Stranger Things stuff in there to me. Um, but it's I can't there I have to give you your space because you're coming at it from a different point of view than I am. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
I think, if I were to watch, and I don't know our age group, and it's not totally relevant, but what I could say is, as a person that grew up in the '80s, if you showed me something at a certain point in my life that was made in the '60s, the early '60s in particular, which is only 20 years prior,
Right.
I would have taken it differently. So I do think that, there is a certain point where, like, unless you are really, this is just me speaking, I could be totally wrong. I'm trying to get in your head here, but unless you're really interested in the '80s style, like the motif of, you know what I mean, and like have that point of reference, it might not hit as hard as something of the same story, because the story is great, like The
Yeah.
Shining's a great story, it's a great story, but the way it's presented may hit you differently than it hits me. It's not to say that the new It is bad. It's just like, I'll give you an example of what I'm trying to say,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
right? So, like, Tim Curry's It in the '80s is horrifying, right?
Still.
Because first, he's Tim Curry, so he's fucking scary. But second of all, he has actual makeup on and is actually dressed like a clown that, in a different context, in a different movie, in a different town, for a different reason, would just be a clown. And that's what made him so scary, is because you're getting these flash scenes of a guy that's just a clown with balloons, like in the middle of like a waterfall, like off in the distance, or in a sewer, or in these weird places. Whereas the new one, it was the face was so CGI'd. It looked great for CGI. Don't get me wrong. It looked awesome. If there was no other it'd be great the way it looked. But that made it less scary to me, because I didn't feel like he was ever a real person. I always felt like the new he was a monster. Whereas in the other one, you could understand why these kids would be fooled by this Tim Curry character, because he just looks like a clown. He just looks like a person. What could go
Right.
wrong? Whereas the new one, he just looks horrifying from the very first scene of the new It. You're like, holy shit, and there's a certain element to the new one where, like, even at 7 years old, the temptation in seeing something that looked like that would be run. So it breaks the authenticity to me. Obviously, I'm over analyzing, but the show is called Real Notes, so that's what we're doing. But
You
like,
already
that's
know.
that's the whole. Yeah, exactly. So, like, that's that would that's the explanation I'm trying to come to with the age and time period thing. You know what I'm saying? Like that.
Yeah.
I think I know that Stephen King, like, really destroyed The Shining in the TV movie. I've seen pieces of it, but not the whole thing. Kubrick was a taskmaster. There is a film. I forgot the name of it, but there's a film. I think it might be called, like, The Assistant or something, or The Laborer,
Hmm.
and it's a documentary. I think it's on Netflix or somewhere, where, like, his right hand man, who was actually one of the stars in Barry Lyndon, another movie of his, became, like, after he filmed Barry Lyndon, he became so obsessed with Kubrick that he gave up his job as an actor, or his aspiration to continue to be an actor, and became Kubrick's assistant. And he did everything for Kubrick, like, everything. Setting the shots. He worked on The Shining. He kept the kid, like, who had never acted before, as I'm sure like,
Right.
in line, and focus, and happy and up. And they, from everything that I've seen, interviews with that child actor, like, as an adult, he said, like, they never told me I was in a horror movie. They always protected me, and they kept me from knowing what was really going on, which I find amazing.
Yeah. Shout out to
But,
them.
you know yeah, exactly. And so, like, I have been around very passionate, creative people. I am one myself. um so in some ways, I identify with a person like Kubrick, who is just about getting it right, no matter what has to be sacrificed on the way there. um and I respect that. I haven't seen every Kubrick movie, but I think the thing that I respect the most about Kubrick in two of his movies, especially as a creator, the way I am with my albums. I've said before, like I see myself, like all my albums are they come from my voice, but they are all about different things or different aspects of me, and I kind of see each album as me directing a new film. So it's going to look like my previous films, but it's going to, it's going to be something all onto itself. And when you compare 2001 Space Odyssey and The Shining, they're completely different movies about completely different things. But the way that the music is laid out, the way that the shots are laid out, the way that the dialogue hangs in the air, all of it is exactly the same. The pacing is exactly the same. It comes from the same mind. And even in filmmaking, especially today, um, to have a strong enough voice to do that as a director is not easy. Producers direct these directors more than the directors are directing the movie. And, a lot of directors today don't write. So, they're not able to go in there and improve the screenplay on set the way that somebody like Kubrick probably did. And there's a lot of difference between the way films are made now and then.
Yeah, totally. And before we move on, I wanted to touch on a couple of the things you had to say about it and also about The Shining because I know one of the issues a lot of people I know have with The Shining is it's different, like the differences between the movie and the book. Like they don't bother me that much, but
Yeah, yeah,
like but yeah, yeah, like a lot of people I know who have like serious, like way more serious criticisms of The Shining than I do are always like it's like they kind of butchered the book. And I get that because there are a lot of times when a movie is made and the source material that it comes from is usually better or at least different, and people have kind of come to appreciate that more. And if you tamper with it too much, it just, kind of like what you were saying with the CGI, it kind of like it just like destroys people's image of, like, it just destroys their expectations, and people aren't always looking to have their expectations subverted in that way. They just
right.
kind of want the thing adapted, and that's cool. Like I have
So
no problem with that.
let me volunteer this back. So I mean, the short answer is don't read the book like me. Just watch the movie, and you won't have these hangups. The longer answer is, you know, think about as a reader. I don't know if you read the book or not, or if you're just going off other people that have, and
It's been
either
a
way is fine.
long time,
Right, that's
a
fine.
long, long, long,
So
long
now
time.
think about when you read The Shining, even if it was a long time ago. I mean, you're a fan of film, obviously. So am I. Like, how can you take all of those pages and represent everything in a film? A film is a different medium than a book.
Totally.
When I write short stories or any kind of fiction that I write, you know, because I'm a fan of film and because I'm a fan of good writing for film, yeah, in the back of my mind, I'm like, wow, this would work. You know what I mean? Like, oh, this would be cool if somebody ever found this one day and made something of it. But I would never expect, um, it's an interpretation. Like a film is an interpretation of a piece of writing.
Yeah.
And I'll give you a really basic example. I grew up as a kid extremely super fan of Guardians of the Galaxy,
The comic, yeah, the
the
original shit,
comic,
cool.
right? So I grew up in the 90s as a preteen. That was at that point. And so I read the original, well, not the original. The originals were in the 70s and the 60s,
Right,
but
right, right.
I read the third original version of the Guardians of the Galaxy in the 90s. Totally different team. Yandu was in those books, totally different character. Yandu was like a spiritual, like sort of naturist, like shaman kind of person in the 90s. In the movies, he's like a ravager, pirate, hunter, like scallywag kind of person.
Yeah.
Totally different. Does that bother me? Not really, because it's a good fucking movie. Like, I love the Guardians of the Galaxy movie. All those characters came in. The most of the characters they use in the Guardians of the Galaxy movie, like Drax and Gamora, they were existed in the 70s. But in terms of the Guardians level, they came in the 2000s series
Yep.
that Andy Andy Lanning and Dan Abnett wrote. Right, the 90s one was written by a guy named Jim Valentino. So obviously I have a big respect for the writers of the original material. There's not going to be many other people that come on this show that are going to know who wrote the Guardians of the Galaxy comic books, and for good reason.
That's why you're here,
All
bro.
right, exactly. So like, I respect the writing, and I love those books. At the end of the day, like to me, like a book is a book and a film is a film. I just think they're two totally different mediums. And unless somebody is going in and like, I think if you start to cut away at the authenticity of the character, I think that can be an issue that I could see
Right.
someone having. But I think if you're telling a new story or an altered story with the same character intent, then I think it's just not. It's just two totally different things. And read the book again.
Yeah, I get that. I think I think that's perfectly valid. And I like if I had stronger feelings about The Shining, I'd also probably feel weird about the whole book thing. Like it also really depends. Like
I
like
understand where they're coming from. I used to think like that, but then I stopped thinking like that. I
right.
used to really think like that, but
Yeah.
I don't. I mean, there's a reason nobody has ever made a Catcher in the Rye film,
Yeah.
because it's a perfect book, and some of the things in that book can't be represented on film
Nah.
correctly. It's so like certain books are really good at being books, and it would be really bad if they were made into movies. So there is, it's two different mediums. It's like translating a poem into a piece of music. I mean, it's
Right.
it can be done, but they are two different things. You're still putting squares into circles. It
Right.
just, are you happy with doing that? Do you think that's creative, or do you think that's a waste of time because you're trying to get this square into a circle?
And yeah, I love before we move on, I love the point you made about like getting like before you start, like it's only gonna be worse if you start picking away at the authenticity of the character, because like there are so many different
Mm-hmm.
interpretations of so many different kinds of media where like the like the core of a main character, the core of a protagonist is still in there. So it still feels like so like even if it isn't like a 100% faithful adaptation, like it still feels like you're watching a thing. And um like that's kind of like I guess having seen both versions of it, like I still recognized the new Pennywise played by one of the younger Skarsgårds. I forget which one. I recognize that Pennywise as Pennywise, but he's also like a different kind of Pennywise. And I was just for reference, I'm 29, so I was I don't think I might not have.
Okay.
I forget exactly what year it came out. I've seen it. I didn't see it on TV, but like I had already seen it before I saw the new one.
I'm
And
not that old either, man. I mean,
yeah, no,
I'm
of
not.
course.
I mean, I'm older. Like somebody that's 13 years older than me was born in 1965 or some. You know what I mean? Like, so
Right.
I was probably like 4 or 5, and I remember the scene at the Chinese restaurant, and with the eyeball in the fortune cookie,
Yeah.
and just like totally being freaked out. And I didn't remember what that was even from until I made it a point to go in and check out. I guess when they announced the new It, they put the old It back on TV, and I was like, I'm gonna watch that. I want to see that. And I made a point, and then I bought the DVD or the Blu-ray later, and so I watched it again because I really loved it. And when that Chinese food restaurant scene came up again, I was like, wow, I hadn't remembered where that nightmare was. I thought maybe that was my own nightmare. But to me that's perfect though. It's campy, but it's super believable. I guess a lot of
Mhm.
people, that have a different expectation of visual effects, would see that and think it's comical. But for me, I'm looking at that scene at the end at the end of the new one where Pennywise, I think he's like shooting fire or like whatever the fuck is happening at the end of the movie, where it just becomes a cartoon to me. Like he's just like a fire breathing giant clown. Like, oh, no. It's when he's dancing with the fire and he does like the
Yeah,
little jig.
that's
And
my
I'm
favorite
just
part of
like,
that whole
yo,
movie.
B, like, this is not but that's funny, right? Like
Yeah.
it's good because it's funny. not good because
Yeah.
it's scary, and there's a difference, you know. And
Yeah.
that's like one of those things, you know what I mean? Where like, yes, you can make him dance at warp speed, you know, but it's also context, you know. Like you could compare that to like Fury Road when the guitar dude is like, you know, on the train, and he's like, you know, they just have like a hired guitarist at all times, and
Yeah.
that shit is funny, but it's also fucking eerie and haunting at the same time. And that's a new movie, you know, that's a modern movie. I thought that was fucking brilliant because I'm in the theater watching that, and you know, you've got the surround, and you can hear this fucking guitar like thrashing your face, like from all angles. And as a musician myself, you know, and a fan of music, it's hilarious, but it's also like fucking haunting and weird and bizarre.
Yeah.
And while you're chuckling, you're kind of wondering, what the fuck does this mean? And it's great. That's art. You know, that's what art is about. It's about confusing you just enough without irritating you. And like,
Right.
I think that's the fine line, you know, with visual effects. What you can do and what you should do are two different things.
Right. And it's great that you brought that up because that's also never explained. Like you don't know where that guy came from,
No.
what he's supposed to be doing. He's just there. And I remember seeing Fury Road in the theater too when it first came out. Like that was like I was really into the game Borderlands at that point. So I was like already very much into that like post-apocalyptic like desert type shit. So I was already like looking for that stuff anyway. And I saw that and I was like, okay, this is gonna be great. Like so but no, I agree that like that's
I mean, it's
I
also my style. You know what I mean? Like it's
right,
that's
yeah,
my style of humor and entertainment. Some people they're not into that. You know what I mean? Like
right.
I don't not you, but like in general, like I'm sure a lot of people saw like that part of Fury Road and just were confused by it and irritated them, and it kept them from enjoying the movie as fully as they wanted to. I don't, you know what I mean? Like, oh,
You
to
know,
each their own. You know,
right.
so it is what it
That's
is.
personal. Yeah, it's like you said, it's all about perspective. And
Mhm.
and yeah, I really appreciate you bringing up that perspective thing because like that, you know, like that colors our experience with every kind of art, whether it's film or paintings or music or whatever. So I think that's
Cult- Culture moves so fast now with technology
yeah,
that it's one of the great sort of divides in understanding, I think, you know, because a film, the pacing of a film, the look of a film is so different than it was even 10 years ago, and certainly 10 years before that. You know, if you, it just, it can, and music is the same way. You know, what is acceptable musically 10 years ago is different than what's acceptable today and 10 years
yeah,
before, 10 years ago, all that. Like culture is beautiful because it's constantly evolving. Not just in the West, but around the entire world. Music is always changing, culture's changing, art's changing. But for fans of art, you know, it gives us all sort of like this responsibility to sort of have this empathy toward, you know, previous generations and current generations that we might not understand, and it's a great place to come together.
oh man,
That's what I love about it. You know, I really do.
that's that's a word, bro. Wow. That's that. Yeah, I love like bridging the gap is like I'm sure you
Hmm.
know this about me at this, but like bridging the gap is something that's so important to me, like
Yeah,
between the old and the young, and like all like particularly within rap.
yeah.
And I wanna save that for later because that's gonna be one of the last things I ask you about. I'm so happy
Cool.
you're already there. That's
Word,
fire.
man. Yeah, man.
Um,
Dope.
but before we get to that, I wanna know a little bit more about your early time with music. So like when did you like you've already mentioned a couple of times that at this point, like around the time you had seen Basquiat, you already knew or at least that was like part of the spark that made you want
Sure.
to start engineering. So when did you first fall in love with rap music in particular? Like when did you first even decide you wanted to do or like not even do it, but just like hear
Yeah.
it and be a part of it?
Um, I heard rap music before this moment, but when speaking of dating myself here, but like when Mary Mary came out from Run DMC, that was the moment where rap went from being something that I heard at a very young age and was familiar with, like my first memories, and actually I talk about this on the album
Yep.
on Only Child. Like there's a song called U68, And U68 this is actually really relevant to your question, not just a cheap plug, but U68 was a music video local television station in New York City in 1984 and 1985. It only lasted for really the better part of 14 or 15 months. When you're 6, that's like your whole life. So to me, it was like this huge thing. And, my family didn't have cable, you know, till after I moved out of the house. You know what I mean? So like
Right.
I never saw cable until I met my wife. Well, that's not true. I had some friends that had cable in high school and shit, but like I didn't know MTV. I heard about it and watched it at friends' houses in junior high and high school. But at that age, this is what it was. And cable, in fairness, in 84 and 85, cable was a new thing that not many people had. But in 84 and 85, like U68 was on your dial, and TVs then had the dials. And U68 was a channel. At the back in the day, like your TV station just had your TV set just had your rabbit ears and your 2 dials, and most of the channels were on that first band. But if you went to the U band, you can go to channel 68, and it was music videos all day. And that's where I first came in contact with rap music and hip hop. It was Run DMC, Fat Boys, UTFO, Houdini, all those groups, and then all the other '80s stuff like Tears for Fears and Hall Notes and Cyndi Lauper and all that shit was playing. And I got like a mix of all of that, and hip hop really stood out to me. Fat Boys and Run DMC in particular, of course, to a 6-year-old is gonna really hit the nail on the head. And you know, um, it 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 shaped me. And then like when my family moved, a lot of Only Child, the album that I just made, it takes place in my earliest memories, and my earliest memories are before my family moved from a place uh, older, and people were playing like He's Tougher Than Leather and Mary Mary and Beats to the Rhyme, and like that crystallized it that this is something that I was going to be a part of. And then I didn't really start rapping until junior high school. My first shit that I did was probably when I was about 12, when I first started writing raps and stuff. And then I just kept growing from there. Honestly, like by the time I was done with high school, I wasn't even really rapping. I was trying to like save up money so I could buy DJ equipment and make beats and stuff. And then I just had it in me. When I stopped for a couple years from like maybe 16 to 20. I didn't really take rapping very seriously. And then when I hit 20, 20-ish, I started writing again, and I slowly built up the capacity to, do what I do. And I honestly, like, I didn't really hit a stride of like, you know, rapping and making music that was within, I don't know, that I was comfortable with, like, within my own skin until I was in my 30s. And
Mm,
I think that's something that's important to be said. Like, I mean, I'm proud of the music I made, most of it, that I made in my 20s. I never did any weak shit, but and that stuff could have went further had it been the right time and place. But um, it wasn't until my young 30s that I really started writing music that I felt like started to connect with people and started to connect with me, harder.
right. And that's I feel like like especially because you were coming up like earlier in rap's life, like that was a thing. From what I understand, that was a thing. Like being the 30-year-old rapper wasn't a thing that anybody was like trying to hear like that. Like rap was like even more aggressively
That's
a
right.
young man, a young person's game than it is now. It
Mhm.
kind of feels like there's more
That's
space for people from there, like late 20s to
Yeah, I
early
mean,
30s
dude,
up
like
until
30
whenever.
years old. Yeah, I mean, 30 years old was like ancient in rap music. Like you couldn't be 30. There's stories you could read. I remember, I'm a huge Guru fan. Guru's one of my favorite MCs of all time.
He's the
And
greatest.
And Guru, there was a story, I don't remember where I heard it, but there was a story about Guru being very protective of his age. And a lot of people didn't know, and I didn't realize this. Guru is like a year or two older than DMC is.
Wow.
And like, but obviously Gangstar came along and got signed much later than Run DMC, almost 10 years later, but maybe a little bit shy of 10 years. But Guru, was protective about like how old he was, and felt a certain kind of way about the possibility of being judged as an older rapper, and always wanted to be, you know, seen as current. And I don't blame him, because that was what the culture was then. And I think to some degree it still is now. It's just that now we have so many avenues of releasing music and being independent that people like me just stop giving a fuck.
Right.
Just like, well, I'm just gonna do this because I can, and like you can't stop me. So like,
Yeah.
as a 40 plus MC and creative, like, who's gonna tell me shit? I'm gonna keep doing what I do. But that wasn't really an attitude you could have at a time when major labels were the difference between you having a career and not. Rap was still really young then. You couldn't
Right.
just independently like tell the whole world to fuck off. If you wanted to release music and people to hear it, this is pre-internet. So like, how would people even hear you if you weren't being having your product pressed up by a label of some sort?
Right. Yeah. Or being like you, and like really being tuned into like local TV and local radio, because because of course there were tons of people who were all over like Stretch and Bob and all of that stuff. But like if you didn't have
Hmm.
like if you
I
weren't in that
was, yeah,
area and you didn't have that resource, then you weren't hearing shit. Like you just weren't, like or not that you weren't hearing shit, but you
absolutely.
were only hearing like what was on the radio or like what the labels were putting forward. So I just think that's an interesting contrast in an era where like Rock Marcy is doing his thing, and like Griselda and somebody like Danny Brown can like have his
Hmm.
big break when he turns 30. I think about that all the time now. Like that probably wouldn't have happened back in like the
Yeah, I mean,
those days.
no, it wouldn't have. And if it did, it would have been like, oh yeah, he's 25. Like nobody would have admitted it. So it's interesting, man. I feel blessed that I was raised in an area that I was in New York City, that I was raised in the era that I was, when you know, I caught like Red Alert in his prime on the radio.
Man.
I caught Flex you know, before Flex became like a national name, like when he was
Yeah.
DJing locally. I can remember hearing Chuck Chill Out DJ on the radio, but I could also remember vividly, like catching Stretch and Bobito on the air. And, late era Awesome 2 on 1059, Underground Railroad with Jay Smooth. Like I remember all of those shows, and I caught a little bit of the old school air quotes, and some of the the new school stuff. I was in the right time at the right place in some ways, and other ways not, but in some ways, like I was fortunate for that. And it gives me, I think you have to make the best out of the time that you have while you're young. I mean, I sound super old saying that. Ugh.
I
but
mean,
but you have to make the best out of that time, because it gives you the context for who you're going to be when you are older. Like the things that I say and talk about in life and in my music wouldn't exist and wouldn't have the same flavor if I didn't go through what I went through, at the time when I did, or have the experiences that I did at the time when I did. Like your 20s are like the foundation for the rest of your life. If you I really sound like a dad here, which I'm not, but like if you fuck your 20s up, your whole house is on a shitty foundation, and you're going to be fixing your house the whole rest of your fucking life. It's not to say that you can't have fun or do whatever the fuck, but like, you know, that's just the reality of it. And so like I was lucky that like I got exposed and was into music and knew where to go and found my way through like navigating the culture and get myself involved even in it.
right. And like yeah, like that kind of like just being grateful about that is so like things could have gone so many other ways, and you really like you
Definitely,
you
definitely.
were you put yourself in a position where like you put yourself in a position where you were somebody who was into this culture, and you just made your way, and and like you've mentioned this a whole bunch of times since we started talking about your work as an engineer, like, and of course most people listening probably know that you played a very big part in helping Cannibal Ox's The Cold Vein come to life, and did a lot of early work with Def Jux, which
Mhm.
is like really incredible. Like, I don't know if I ever told you that, but that's like, wow, that's incredible. So like, just
Word, man. Thank
just
you.
of course, just for like some context, like what, like you've kind of talked about it a little bit, but like when did you realize that you like really wanted, or actually no, let me ask you a different question. When did you realize that you wanted to both be a
Hmm.
rapper and an engineer? Like, was that ever, what, did those two things ever happen for you at once, or like did one happen before the other, or how did that happen for you?
um, you know, I've gotten the question before a few times of, because I do engineer and I produce and I rap and do this and do that and do the other thing. Like it's very valuable to understand, I think, if you're the kind of person that does want to do a lot of things, like I was, like you have to like walk before you can run, and you have to spend a good amount of time on each thing. They can overlap. Like I was rapping when I was engineering. I was in a group called The Presence. We put out an EP called Advanced Bloodbath. We put out a single on Def Jux called Woke. Before, ironically, before woke was like one of the most popular terms ever. Like
Right.
we were referring to waking up to horror, but that was what woke meant then in 2003. But we put out that single on Def Jux. So I was rapping at the time when I was engineering, but um, as I've said on one of my other podcasts, flashback sessions, which is on Common Records YouTube page, I talked a bit about like why I didn't put out more music then. I was taught very strictly when I was in recording studios as an intern before Jux, and when I was learning, the art of engineering at IR, like don't sweat the musicians, don't, busybody yourself, don't do those things. And rightly or wrongly, I took that ethos very, very, very seriously. And um, I think if you ask anybody that knew me then, nobody would ever say that I was some kind of brown noser trying to push my own agenda. I was the antithesis of that, to a fault
Right.
perhaps. And so yeah, I mean, I was rapping at the time. I was putting stuff out. I've always had an independent streak. I always wanted to do things my own way. And even though I was around people that were doing things very positively in hip hop and making moves, I still wanted to do it my own way. And again, rightly or wrongly, that's just the mentality that I had, especially in my 20s.
Right. And like that meant, but like at the same time, like that mentality led you toward finding your own path, and like kind of building your own foundation, which of course leads you to something like Uncommon Records. So like how, like talk to me about the beginning of Uncommon Records, and how, and like why you decided to make your own label and like create this house for yourself.
Yeah, I mean, like I was saying, I mean, I think, being around Def Jux at an early time, like I got to see, what I thought they were doing right. And, sometimes you get to see what people are doing wrong. I mean, every label does things right and wrong. Wrong doesn't mean evil wrong. It just means incorrect wrong.
Right.
And so I wanted to do things my way, and there were things that I wanted to do at the time when I started Uncommon Records. I wanted to make sure that everything that we put out was not left field on purpose. You know what I mean? Like trying to be quote unquote weird or anything, but like I wanted to make sure that the way I referred to it at the time, that I've since stopped referring to it, is like progressive. I wanted to make sure that everything, you know, went after a certain style, that it was experimental. And that's what I wanted to create with with Uncommon Records. And for a long time, that's what I did. And I, to some degree, that's what I still do with the label. But, those sorts of ideas are very simplistic in today's environment. It's kind of arcane to go to like this experimental, putting any kind of like subgenreification on forms of hip hop is to me is very passe. It's very like, old school. So like, I wouldn't approach music that way today, but I'm glad that I approached music that way then. And, that set the foundation again, like I said, for who I am today and what I do today. And that's a big reason why I started Uncommon Records. I mean, it was, 2004 was our first release. And now here we are, 17 years later, still putting out music. I've had some detours here and there, but like, still putting out music. And, some of the aims of the label changed over time. I went from being an active sort of talent scout, A&R kind of person running a label, trying to find people to bring into the fold, to being very internalized, to being like, oh, well, I don't even produce anything on this label. I need to produce everything on the label. To now, I think I have like some sort of balance between it only being my production and my voice, and being balanced with like a select few people that I know, that I trust, that I believe in, and that have been with me for a long enough time that I know that, well, knowing is impossible, but that I feel, is not going to blow up in my face. You know what I mean? That I'm going to have people around me that have my back and that I have theirs. And that's
Right.
the most important thing you can have in life, especially in music. Because if you don't have that in music, what the fuck do you have? You have a bunch of phony bullshit, So
Yeah.
that's what my label is about, really. It's about loyalty and respect and talent and support, and that's where I'm at now, and that's what I hope to bring to the industry, really.
Right. And like you've been around, and yeah, like being around and like still standing after 17 years, especially now, that's no joke. Like it takes a lot to be able to run a business in the music industry for like 5 years, let alone almost
Hmm.
2 decades. And like you've and like you've kind of you've like cultivated a space for people like yourself, and for people like Short Fuse, and all the work that you've done with like Messiah Music and everything. Like
Hmm.
you've really like you're reflecting, like you're not bullshitting when you say that you've really built this space for you and this small community of people that you trust to kind of go off and make music that you like and hopefully connect with other people.
Yeah.
And um that's really tight. Like that's probably like we there's been a lot of talk about like the quote unquote old school and like morals, and that's probably about as like down and dirty hip hop shit as you could possibly be. Just like that idea of loyalty and that idea of just like having that like strong
Yeah,
moral
man.
backbone. Like that's fire. Like it's commendable.
Hip hop to me, the thing that hip hop is that other genres are not sometimes, it's and where hip hop loses me when it doesn't have this is hip hop is about authenticity. If you're talking about street shit, if you're talking about emo shit, if you're talking about, weird shit, whatever, if it sounds authentic and it true living is authentic to that person speaking it, even if it's something that I haven't lived myself, then hip hop puts it in a form that we can have that, like we were saying before, that meeting space where we have that meeting of the mind. Other genres don't have that ability the way hip hop does. So that's where I come from, man. That's what I'm about. And like, you know, look, doing this for 17 years, I'm not doing it because I'm making fucking thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars off of it by any means. I'm doing it for the love of it, and because more importantly, the love of hip hop is there, certainly, but the passion for creating and for sharing what I do and what the people I care about do is tantamount. That's the driving force that has me doing this for this many years. There's been plenty of times where I've been like, maybe I should just stop and do something else. Maybe I should spend a good 5 years just teaching myself how to write better fiction, or just teach myself how to paint way better than I can now, studying the elements of how to paint things, because I didn't go to school for this shit. I didn't go to school for music. I didn't go to school for any of this shit,
Right.
So like nobody taught me anything. And I come from a hip hop era where like if you had equipment, nobody would give you tips. There was no YouTube. There was no homies. Even people that knew you would be like, yo, figure that shit out. And
Yeah.
like that's what I come. I don't bring that to the culture or to the music, because we're in a different time. But that is what I'm cut from. People would literally not show you how to do shit in EMP on purpose.
Mm.
Like that was normal. That wasn't even like, man, this sucks. That was just like, oh yeah, of course he's not going to tell me how to do that.
Yeah. Sink or swim
So
type shit. Yeah. Totally.
absolutely.
Wow. And um yeah, like you were just talking about the fact that like you've thought about kind of veering away and focusing on other types of art, but there's always something that draws you back, and that's how you know that you're
Yeah.
really clearly, like that's how you know that you're really invested in this shit.
Yeah.
And that comes through in the way that a lot of your recent albums have really explored concepts. Like you're somebody who loves to you love a good concept record, and I
Mm-hmm.
love that about you. And the one like whenever I think about the quintessential Uncommon NASA concept record, it's always it's always New York Telephone for
Mm-hmm.
me. Like I don't really know why I come back to that one all the time, but like I love the cover, and just like the way you take all these aspects of the city and cram it into an album is really unique and not like anything I've heard in a while. So like just because I'm curious, like talk to me about where the idea to create a project like New York Telephone came from, and like what it means to you a
Word, man.
handful of years later.
Well, thank you for saying that, first of all.
Yeah.
Um, you know, New York Telephone came out of like the wake of my first album, which is Landed the Way It Is. And I actually had made the song New York Telephone for Landed the Way It Is. And what I was going to do was just take New York Telephone, the song, and make a couple other songs and do like a follow-up EP. And shout out to Black Tokyo, because I remember talking to him about that. He's one of the producers that worked on New York Telephone and Landed the Way It Is, and so and of course produced all of Halfway. And he was like, "Nah, man, you should take it, make it an album." And I was like, and I was the first person that I can remember that said that to me. And I was like, you know what, you're right. I have enough now. I have enough songs. I can keep going. And it just evolved from there. And that was the first album that I like used interludes to bring a concept or a theme together. I kind of like to refer to my records as themes, themed records.
Right.
And that kind of brought that theme together. And I had actually gotten some critical reviews, positive reviews from critics about Landed the Way It Is, and there was one review that like pointed out how New York the record sounded, not just like the beats or whatever, but like my voice and the way that I carried myself or whatever.
Yeah.
And I just started to buy into that. I started to think like, oh wow, like this is something that people are seeing in me that I didn't even realize I was putting out there, because it's natural, it's real, and I need to like cultivate that as an artist, and that's where New York Telephone evolved from. Obviously these aren't all conscious thoughts at the time, but like this is that's what I can go back and say about that time period and what I was doing. And that was one of the first times that I didn't just sort of do something that was reflective on my own life, but that I sort of purposefully reflected on certain experiences in my life that were all authentic, but all kind of tied together in that theme. And that's how New York Telephone came to be.
Right. And of course, like one of the, of course, probably the most, probably what I would arguably call like the centerpiece of the project is, a song like This Bodega's Trying to Kill Me, which is just this very like I can't even put into words like how I felt when I first heard the song. Like it's could you explain where the idea for This Bodega Is Trying to Kill Me came from? Because it's something that I always come back to whenever I think about your music. Like I'm not really sure why.
Sure. It's just living around bodegas, and living in that environment and working in that environment. You're constantly, for me, living and bodega isn't, it's not a term in New York. Bodega is a term depending on who you're talking to, of course, but talking to me, and talking to white people, a bodega is just kind of like a quick, cheap deli. You know what I mean? I know that there are some more important cultural references to be made about, a bodega in a certain context. But in the context of that song, a bodega is referring to really like, a deli that's run to just sell shitty products to people without real consideration for their health or well-being, and then taking the profits of that outside of whatever area that is. And that was sort of what This Bodega Is Trying to Kill Me is about. And I think anyone that, people that, when I would take that song on the road, I would go to places where I started to work into my act, because I always like to do like, my music's kind of serious and thinky, so I would try to be as funny as I'm capable of being in between songs, which is not very funny, but is at least sarcastic funny. And I would often poll the audience depending on where I was and say like, do you know what a bodega is? And believe it or not, I say that, actually believe it or actually don't believe it. There were some places that they had never heard that term before. There were places that were, that just had not heard the term before, and I had to explain the song to people. But even in those places, there'd be one person that had visited New York and had been to a bodega once in their life and understood what that song was getting at, and that was really rewarding about that. And it was a song that I performed a lot, and it was just cool. I mean, the sample just led itself to something grimy and sort of food based, and the way that Black Tokyo flipped that beat, and it just led me to that place, man. I wrote I laid out the chorus myself. I recorded that, and I did my verses, and I was off and running with that song. And so, yeah, but that was, and it fit, like I had, Bodega was one of the first songs that was done, like I said, like during that EP phase of New York Telephone. And once I had a song like that, and I had the New York Telephone track, like, and a few others, that's what started the ball rolling of like, oh, this is an entire theme of New York, and things that used to be and things that still are, and navigating my way through New York as it is now in current time with the context of a person that has been here for 10, 15, 20 years, whatever it was at the time,
Yeah, and considering how hard gentrification continues to hit so many different areas in New York, and just like the fact that just like all the different people I've seen throughout the city, just like all the different types of people I've seen throughout the city and the way they interact with bodegas in general, I just like the song that like you were mentioning the beat almost like it almost sounds like a horror movie. It almost sounds like one of those B movies that you were talking about, like watching as a kid. Like that's always kind of the vibe I get from it.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
something that's kind of like something that's kind of campy, but like not too campy to miss it. Like it almost reminds me of something like The Toxic Avenger, right? Like The Toxic Avenger is a movie that I love
Yeah,
because
yeah.
it's so silly, but it's also like an incredibly it's got like an incredibly urgent message to it. And like as someone as a New Jersey native, like that's like my stomping ground. So like I'm just big on the Toxic Avenger. But like that
Right.
song gives me that type of vibe. It's like it's like engaging and kind of like fun, but not too fun that you don't miss the fact that you're talking about like, oh, like
Right.
watch out for people who are trying to poison you with this food and take advantage of you.
Yeah, I mean
Like
it's also like to your point about the beat and the way it works, you know, it's dystopian on purpose. You know,
right,
it's embellished on purpose. I mean, this is art. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, I guess that's lost on some people sometimes, but like, you know, music is an embellishment of real life. You know, so you know, do I stay awake at night like terrified of bodegas and the food? Like, no, but like, you know, it certainly is a thing that gnaws at you, you know, where you're just like, wow, like, you know, I can turn on the TV and hear a news story every day about, you know, food deserts, but I'm watching, you know, people drive off in Mercedes selling, you know, 50 cent like hostess cakes, you know, in the same area. It's just like it's just not, you know, it's not about being a health nut or like, you know, like super like progressive on on that particular topic. I mean, I am, but that's not what the point of the song was. It was more
right,
about like, you know, just the dilapidation of areas that should, you know, get more support and get more um you know, more actual servicing from industry that they don't, you know.
right. And you know, to your point, one of my good homies, my man Kemba from the Bronx, he wrote an article for the Huffington Post quite a few years ago about about like about like being in the Bronx and like the fact that the BX is probably like the fruit and vegetable hub of the entire city. Like all the groceries, like all the grocery stores get their stuff from the Bronx. Like it all comes from there.
Hmm.
And he would talk about in the article he talked about
Interesting.
waking up he would talk about waking up in the morning and seeing the trucks with all the healthy food going to Manhattan, and he would just be going to like Kennedy Fried Chicken. You know, like that's like I think that's the type of shit
Mm-hmm.
that this bodega is trying to kill me kind of reminds me of. And like
Yeah. No,
as someone
absolutely.
as someone from the
That's
tri-state
absolutely
area,
the point. Yeah, that was what I was trying to say. Yeah.
right, yeah. And like as some I didn't mean to cut you off, sorry. And then like as someone from the tri-state area,
No,
like
no, no, go ahead.
that resonated so hard with me, like as someone from the tri-state, like so yeah, like that's part of the reason why I love that song so much.
Word.
um so so moving on to Only Child, which we've kind of hinted at quite a few times, but now we're here. This is your first album you've done, and not it hasn't been too long, but you know, like it feels like
Mhm.
this is just another this is just another really interesting theme that you've put together here with Messiah Music. Like you mentioned that this album is just about this is probably one of your most personal records that I think I've ever heard.
Definitely.
Like it's so like I guess what inspired you to open yourself up so much about your early life on this album and kind of like use that as a theme to tie together these songs? Like why now?
I think, you know, for me with this record, like this is a record that I really feel like I didn't have the ability or the talent to make until now. I always had these thoughts in my head. I always was thinking about these moments in my life, you know, and saw them in my head, not as music particularly, but like visually, and they were important moments for me, you know, like Your Hands Will Turn to Rust and U68 and things like that. Those are important moments in my young life. And you know, as an only child, I don't know whether this is true or not because I only have the experience of being an only child, but I feel like being an only child, I've held on to a lot of those early memories, maybe more vividly, um, than the average person that maybe has siblings and just has more memories. I mean, I think if you have siblings, you have memories, especially if you're similar in age, um, with your siblings. You know what I mean? So your memories are going to be like, you know, that time when whatever happened with whoever that is. You know, when you're an only child, you don't have that. You know, you have the memory of something that happened to you. That's it. You know, your whole life. I mean, even as an adult, like,
Right.
you
Singular
know,
perspective and all that.
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, obviously I have memories with my wife because I'm married, but like until you do get married as an only child, you really just have memories that happen to you, and that's it. Um, and part of that is why this record was made. You know, it was to get those things off my chest musically and translate them into music. And like I said, like I had to go through all the other records that I made to get to the point where I could make a record like this. You know, and um, I think it follows in the line, of a lot of my music. Um, I think each of my albums is themed a certain way and stands on its own for better or worse from the other records that are around it, but in my catalog. But I also would like to think that, I could take a song from here and take a song from there, and they would actually be interchangeable to different records too. And I think with Only Child, like maybe this is the least like that. Like this record really kind of is on its own. I mean, there are some songs on here about life and times that I had in New York City, just like other albums of mine. But there are also, songs that deal with mortality and life decisions and my earliest memories, which I hadn't brought in. And I talk about my family a lot. To me, this record is like a dedication to my parents and my earliest memories with them. Um, and that's what this record is to me.
Yeah. And I really got a lot of that stuff. I really got a lot of that like familial connection from it.
Mhm.
It really feels to me like the first and last songs kind of hit me pretty wild. The first song being Court Strangers in the Hour of Chaos and the last song
Mhm.
being Trimesters. Like um there are just so many, like you just give so much of yourself on
Thank you.
this. It's that's not an easy thing to do in any medium, and like
Right.
especially in rap music where people like
Hmm.
like there are of course all these preconceived notions about what it means to be hard, and
Yeah.
how much of sharing, like how much of yourself you're allowed to share before it starts to get to be too much.
Right.
And like I guess I was just wondering, like, was there ever a period of time when you made this where you kind of had to confront those issues and had to be like, nah, you got to stop. Like, you can do this, and you don't have to hold yourself to anybody else's preconceived notions. Like, was it like did that insecurity ever come up while you were making
No,
this?
no. I mean, I understand what you're saying, and that certainly is part of life in the rap medium. But it didn't come up on this record because I've been doing that already.
Right.
This is just a further step, probably a much deeper step, but granted, but if you listen to parts are written at night, you're going to hear me sort of opening up and saying things that the average rapper is not going to say about themselves.
Very
And I
true.
think Only Child just kind of took all of those sort of hints of that I had dropped on other records and just made it a whole album of that, or at least most of an album of that. And I get into things that, I really did. Like I said, it's dedicated to my parents. It's made for myself. Like I made this. I love the culture and I love art and I love being able to connect with people. And it's really beautiful when you can make a record about yourself and other people can see themselves in that story. And that's my hope with Only Child, that happens for people. Um, because I'm not that interesting. But I think the point is making a record about yourself is to get that identification and to have everybody that hears it sort of meet in this middle ground and bring people together by saying like, oh, you had this experience. Well, I actually had a similar experience, and here it is in song form, and like I think we're recording this before the album is out, but the album will probably be out when people are hearing this, and I'm super curious what people take from it, because a lot of the stuff on here is very inside my own experiences and things that I suspect only I'll understand, but everything that I wrote is with the intent. It is with an intent, I should say. It all makes sense. It all is there for a reason. And I hope that, writing a record that's this personal about me, that people see themselves in what I'm saying, and we can come together, or, around an album, or
Right.
around a piece of art.
Nah, facts. And to me, the one song that really, like, the song that struck me the most hearing this was a song like Vincent Crane, because I think I think the idea of
Mm.
coming, the like the idea of like discovering someone and like knowing about someone who you feel like should be more famous than they are is something that I think
Right.
a lot of people, especially within our culture, kind of, and like not even just rap, but like
Yeah.
music in general. Like there are so many unsung and
Yeah.
underappreciated people that no one thinks about, and I think that's an idea that kind of speaks to this whole, like, you feel like it's only something that you understand, but you're excited to see whether or not other people connect with it. And like I connected with that. So like what so like walk me through real quick. Walk me
Right.
through the
Yeah.
creation of Vincent Crane and like where that idea came from for that song.
Yeah, I mean, the song is about Vincent Crane, but it's also about me, and it's also about what you said. You know what I mean? Like, so you got what's there, but there's a few ways to look at it. Like the song in its like literal form is about my internship, my first internship at a recording studio, working with older dudes, generational gap, you know what I mean? Like I was 17 years old working in a recording studio with dudes that were in their like, I guess they were in their mid 30s, but when you're 17, everybody's old, so who the fuck knows? But like,
Right.
we're probably in their mid 30s, if not 40s. And I'm there like just like a sponge, like soaking up music. And I'd only known hip hop and a little bit of reggae by the time I hit this studio. I didn't know anything else. Nothing. And you know, I came in and I started listening to like all these progressive rock records, well, CDs that they had. And when I was there, literally, as I say in the song, like mopping and doing dishes and shit, I'm listening to like, King Crimson and Emerson, Lake and Palmer and Gentle Giant and groups like that. And just learning that like rock music doesn't have to be Nirvana and Pearl Jam and Guns N' Roses. It can be this. Like, wow, I didn't know that. And like, then as I got older, like I say in the song too, like I started to see those similarities of like, oh, okay, like when a genre was around for a certain amount of time, Pookie, Fendulum, all that stuff that was going on in New York, Juggernauts. To me, that was progressive. That was experimental. That was taking hip hop in a different direction. That was more story, story kind of, direction. The way that I understand how music worked, beyond my little fandom of hip hop. And that's what the song is about from my perspective, but it's also about like, you dig into music like that, you do discover these people that deserve to be known, that inspire you and change your life. Like a person like Vincent Crane, who was the leader of a group called Atomic Rooster, and they put out some amazing albums. And this dude usually kept the group as a trio, and he was an organist. He played the Hammond, and there was no bass player in the group, and he would play the bass lines along with the guitarist with his feet while he played the organ leads to match the guitars, you know what I'm saying? Like with his hands. So like
That's
with
crazy.
the, you know, so like, and that was just the amount of talent that, you know, certain people have. And like you can be, I guess one of the messages of that song too is like you can be that gifted. And if you're not the right look or the right time or from the right place or right about the right things, because most of his music was very dark. Like their biggest album was called Death Walks Behind You. And um, you know, a lot of that, like that Death Walks Behind You and Time Take My Life, which is one of my favorite songs from them, or from Vincent, really, because he wrote it. You know, that inspired an album like Halfway. You know, that inspired a lot of like the way that I think about things. And you know, and I also like thirdly, like, you know, I also understand, you know, we're in the internet age. So if I do a song like that, there's a certain thrill hopefully a person will get from being like, fuck's this guy talking about? Google this, you know what I mean? And like look up Vincent Crane and find out what I'm talking about and like get that second experience. Now that you know who he is, you listen to the song again, you know, you get another experience, hopefully. You know, I mean, those are the kind of things that you try to do with art. You know, you try to make things fun and different, or else you're just doing the same shit every day. So like, you know, that's what that song is about, in a very detailed explanation for you.
Right. And like that's important because like that whole idea of just like if you're not still exploring and looking for new things, like you're not actively learning and you're just kind of like your brain is just kind of in place. And that's not always something that you want to do. And it's clearly not something that you want to do. Like
Mhm.
that thrill of learning a new fact or like learning about a new thing and just kind of having it take over your life for like a week. And just like you're thinking, like,
Yeah.
damn, like this person should really just be more known. Like that really just
Hmm.
speaks to this broader idea of like discovery and what that means, especially in the internet age. Like when like it can feel kind of overwhelming sometimes
Yeah.
because like you have access to everything, but you have access to everything. Like, and that means everything. Like that's the thought of having so much information at your fingertips is wild overwhelming sometimes.
Things happen
But
so fast. You can discover rabbit holes and you know subcultures that you express an interest in becoming a part of so quickly now. You know, back then, like pre-internet, like you know, you'd be able to sit with even an idea of like, I'm a fan of progressive rock music, and that would like sit in, you know, for 6, 8 months, you know, until you know you would never really get tired of it. It would just keep evolving, and like, you know, it's kind of sad. Like, you know, I mean, I do it myself. You know, I'm not like, you know, like I'll find something on YouTube and really be into it. You know, like during the height of COVID, like I was making like weird ass bowls of ramen like every day, and then I just stopped one day because I just, first of all, my cholesterol went way up, but second of all, you know, it's a thing. You know, it's you know, you get access to information so quickly, you know, and the internet is designed to feed you what you want at that moment, not what you need forever. You know, it's there. Like if you click on a recipe for homemade ramen, it gives you five more the next day, and that's great for those 5 days. But then after that, it's burnt you out too fast. So
right.
you know, I think a lot of this record too is, and the same was true for New York Telephone. You know, since you brought that up earlier, you know, it's really about connecting with a time when things moved slower, but not in a nostalgic way, in a way of saying like this is still who we are. You know, this is still how humans work. This is still how the brain works. You know, this is still, we can all take a deep breath, take these tangible memories and things that we explore without, you know, without sitting around and pining for some forgotten time. You know, it's right, it's now. You know, you have control
Right.
over you know how fast things move for you.
Right. And that's actually a pretty great segue into one of these last two questions I have for you, which is like considering the fact that you've been kind of on the vanguard of on the vanguard of hip hop for like nearly 2 decades, like between your solo music and all your engineering work and everything you've done with Uncommon Records, like you've seen a lot of changes within rap and culture at large, like kind of
Mm-hmm.
speaking to this whole like just the whole aspect of like how the internet democratized everything to
Mm-hmm.
an extent.
Mm-hmm.
But like so like for you, like having lived through all of this and experienced everything, like what's one aspect of rap culture that you're surprised has changed as much as it has over the years? Or if you would rather answer this one, what's something about the culture that's kind of stood the test of time that you're surprised is kind of like, oh, people still kind of abide by that?
Um, it's easy to say like the hyper masculinity. Um, it is strange that has survived as much as it has. I think it's eroded a little bit. I'm not one of these people that is super against, you know, like I don't know, tough guy rap and standing up for yourself and you know what I mean? Like I'm not like against that. I mean, I
Right.
have it
Yeah, there's
in
nothing
me.
wrong with it.
I'm from that era, like I'm from the era. If you say some fucking stupid shit, you might get punched in your face, and like it's not like a big deal. I think it's almost like the same answer. You know what I'm saying? Like I think there's some circles where you say that to people and it like the fucking the little monocle falls out of their eye or you hear the silverware in the background and it's like at the end of the day like you can only push people so far, you know what I mean? And like there has to be a point where if you say certain things, there has to be a repercussion for that. You know what I'm saying? And like I don't fault hip hop for keeping those kinds of rules, but I am sort of surprised. Well, to the degree that they do. I don't know. I guess it depends on what generation you're from. Like I'm surprised that people like I'm surprised that I still feel that way. I guess and that people of my age group still feel that way. I'm surprised that we haven't let it go. I can't let that idea go. Not that I'm out here fucking knocking people out or getting punched in the face every day, because it's not the kind of life I want to live. But because I'm a grown person, and I
Right.
have an understanding of like that's not the answer. But for anybody. But I also feel like it is surprising that people haven't sort of let that aspect go that are from my age group of it. But I also am surprised that younger people just don't feel that necessity at all. Um, and for better or worse, I mean, I think having a good nature is great unless you're like a person that takes advantage of it. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know. I'm kind of rambling a little bit, but I just think, you know, being a good person will get you very far. And like, if if you're gonna use like people's goodwill like against them, then you know that's not right either.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of people hide behind like the non-violence in order to sort of be like super passive aggressive in life, and I think that's kind of fucked up. And I think that's like relevant because like I think hip hop in a lot of ways because of where it was started and in New York was very like hyper aware of that sort of thing in some weird way, or at least that's what I took from it. You know what I mean? Like don't bullshit people, don't be an asshole, and like I guess there's still some of that in hip hop. I don't know. It's hard, because I don't keep up with every new movement, so I don't really know the vibes. But um, it is hard for me to say because I think that I guess the thing that I would be most surprised about is that the word and the term hip hop kind of means so little. And I don't want to get into like a real hip hop conversation because that's not where I'm going with it. But like,
Right.
I just think that you can't if somebody is singing, they're singing. You know what I mean? Like hip hop is really about rap, so it could be any kind of rap. But it's interesting to me like that people throw that around But that's been happening for 20, 30 years. That's been happening since like the Hot 97 era of R&B soul, or what is it? What was their slogan? I don't remember. Anyway.
No, me either. Yeah, there's a lot to chew on there because there are quite a few artists who manage to find this really weird like middle ground between rapping and singing that I really appreciate. But I also really like the fact that you brought up like I think the thing you're talking about, and like we were talking about earlier, is about morals and like kind of
Yeah.
having this like code of ethics. And there are a lot of people like across all the age groups who just don't have morals and ethics when it comes to stuff like this. And like they'll just say whatever they feel like needs to be said and take advantage of people. Like you'll have someone
Hmm.
who's like really blatant about it, like DJ Academics. And then there's just other people like who you said will like kind of use a front to be really passive aggressive and just like take advantage of you without you even realizing it. And then like you get gaslit and you're like, oh, like wow, like am I, and then you start to second guess yourself. And
That's a result of the internet too, though. Like, I mean, that's why I don't fuck with the internet like that. Because I just, you can't, you want to find me, you gotta know where to find me at this point in my life. Like I'm too old to keep up with all that shit. It's craziness. And people try to take that outside of the internet because the internet moves way faster than real life. And people
way
try to
faster.
apply that level of speed to real life, and that's when I think people kind of cross lines and shit. And I think you're right though. It does come down to like ethics, man. Like, I come from a fandom and a practice of in hip hop of authenticity and ethics and morals and a code. You know what I mean? And like I can't I don't sit and break down what that is exactly, but you know it when you see it. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that no matter what kind of music you're making, I could care less what kind of music somebody's making. It just has to come from an authentic place. I've seen all kinds of wild shit like, you know, these days that it's not made for me, and it's fine. Like I'm a grown 42-year-old man. I'm not going to understand what a 16-year-old person wants to hear or doesn't want to hear and is just being thrown at them. Um, but if it comes from an authentic place, I'm all for it. Like it's awesome. Like that people are coming up with new things. Who the hell wants to hear a 16-year-old try to sound like somebody from 1992? I don't want to hear that.
Right.
So, you know.
Yeah, like as long as you're being true to yourself, like yeah, like I'm pretty much the same way. Like I've kind of like as I've gotten older, I've started to just appreciate a little bit of everything from every side of rap, and I'm really grateful for that because I've seen a lot of people just kind of fall out and just like lose their love for the whole thing, and it's like I'm not there yet. But I
Yeah,
think
I've come
um
close. I
but
made it. I made it through the other side, but I
right,
was there.
of course, and like that's incredible. It's incredible that you like came to that point, but you like stayed the course and you kind of just planted your flag where you want to plant it, and that you appreciate and understand that like everyone's different, and you can just kind of like have an appreciation for somebody representing their authentic self, whatever that might be, because that's not a lot of people think like that, and that's tight. And like, that doesn't mean you have to like everything, but you can at least get that, like,
Yeah.
hey, like this is you.
I mean,
It feels like you.
what's wrong with somebody that would say like that somebody else doesn't have a right to create what they want to create just because they don't like it?
Like,
It's a weird mentality, man. I mean, I think it does come from a time when hip hop culture was very heavily protected. Um, and I don't have a problem with protecting the culture. I try to do that in my own way as best as I can. But I also think there are there are bigger things at play. Artistic freedom and creative freedom are always going to trump. So it's a level of maturity I think a lot of people need to reach. I mean, you look at the YouTube comments of any old school video, and every single comment is like, "Man, this is how it used to be," and these kids, they don't know nothing. And it's just like, I get that those are just YouTube comments and that they basically mean less than nothing, but the fact that you could count, I mean, I'd put, you name a video made in the 80s or 90s, I'll put any amount of money on within the first 10 comments, if not all 10 of the first comments will be something like that. So that's kind of
Right.
scary.
That's facts. It's horrifying. It's absolutely horrifying. Like, you go and look at, like, real quick before I ask
I
you.
always think about, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah. Like, I went and looked at. I remember when one of the newer Gangstar songs, "Bad Name" came out, and just like looking through the comments of like all the. Since you were talking about Guru earlier,
Mhm.
like, I'm looking at the comments and I'm like, damn, like, this is kind of sad. Like, you're probably like a grown ass man sitting in these YouTube comments talking about like, oh, what you know about, like, shut up, like, just
Yeah.
enjoy the music and move on, like, get a life.
Yeah, well, I always think when I see that, like, what does a young person reading that think? Like, does that really make them want to explore or get into the music? No, you're
Right?
just
No.
driving people away from it. And it's beyond YouTube comments. It's about how people carry themselves in real life too. You know what I mean? Like, you can't just hate on everything. It's ridiculous. It's a really shitty way to live.
Yeah.
And it
Fucking.
doesn't help the cause of what you're trying to protect anyway.
Yeah, being a bum knows no it knows no router or anything like that, like, at all. Um but yeah, so the very so like, to kind of end this on a slightly more positive note, the last thing I wanted to ask you about was, I know you're also quite a big fan of the Twilight Zone, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit
Word.
about your relationship with the Twilight Zone, and like how, if at all, it's kind of like inspired the way you
Yeah.
create, or if you just appreciate like what Rod Serling did, and even if you've seen and watched and liked the reboot that Jordan Peele was behind. So, like, talk to me a little bit about your relationship with the Twilight Zone.
Man, Rod Serling is probably the biggest influence on me and my work of any other creator, in any
Wow.
medium. Um, you know, I love Rod Serling. I love the Twilight Zone. It's my favorite show of all time. Um, I can't express enough admiration for the show and what was done. I could talk for 2 more hours about Twilight Zone episodes with you. It's a big thing for me. Obviously, well, maybe not obviously, because I try not to make it super obvious, but there's lots of Twilight Zone samples in lots of my music. I put together a CD called Mink Swimming Pools, which is basically a collection of mostly back catalog Twilight Zone referencing songs, either with samples or lines, and then I put some new stuff on there too. I did that a couple years ago. I was like early 2017, like before Written at Night came out. And yeah, I mean, it's definitely a big part of what I do. I could probably rank all 165 episodes of the series in the order of preference, without any trouble. So, as far as the new series, I was really excited about it, and I did really enjoy it. I think Get Out is the closest thing to a Twilight Zone movie, in modern times.
I agree
I think
100%.
I think Get Out's one of the best films easily of the last 10 or 20 years.
Hmm.
Um, it's a great movie. Everything about it. It's again, like I said about The Shining. It's a perfect movie. There's nothing you could take away from that movie. So when Jordan Peele was announced as the lead for the new Twilight Zone, I was really excited. And I've, as a ardent fan of the Twilight Zone and of Jordan Peele, um, at times I probably had unrealistic expectations, and then at times I probably like saw something and like was completely mind blown about something nobody else even gave a shit about. You know what I mean? So like I had like swinging, like swinging of emotions. There are some episodes of the new series that are not very good, just like there are some episodes of the original series that are not very good. But when they were on point, man, they were really on point. And I was really disappointed that they didn't come back for a third season. I really wish they would have done it. I know that there was a lot of internet heat on the series itself. Some people didn't like it. People that, but I think the thing that people have to realize about the internet, and this goes back to some of the earlier conversation, is like the internet's full of shit. Like,
Yeah.
The internet will say like, "Oh, the new Twilight Zone's too woke," and it's like, well, the original Twilight Zone was all about civil change. Like, that's the reason I like it so much. Like, the idea that somebody could watch any episode of the original Twilight Zone and not take, some social or civil message from it, or at least an ethical message from it, you'd have to like bury your head in attack the new series, just never watched the Twilight Zone before and
Right. Like,
just assumed that it was, what it was, what they thought it was. And, so it's strange to me. Like I think, there's an episode, I don't know if you saw the new series, but there's an episode called Replay, that's really, really good. There's a lot
I
of
don't
really
think
good episodes.
I don't think I saw that one. The only one I remember watching is the stand-up comedy one. Oh, and there was another
Yeah.
one about some sort of alien thing. It kind of reminded me of They Will Arrive on Mulberry Street or whatever I'm forgetting the
Right.
name of the one where they're like all in the neighborhood and all the neighbors start suspecting each other of the alien invasion. I forget what that one's called. The
Yeah,
Monsters Who Do at Maple Street.
yeah,
That's what it is. There we go.
that was the original series. I guess there was probably some similar notes of that in one of the newer ones. Yeah, the one with the stand-up comedian, it was called The Comedian. Um, but that was one of the better episodes of the series. If I think that at one point I ranked them because I'm really nerdy like that. But I mean, I loved it. Yeah, I loved it. There were only like a handful of episodes I didn't like. But we only got 20 episodes, and you know, 30 would have been fine. I would have wanted more, but I would have been like, okay, it's a hard series. I get it. But I really wish they would have given us a third season. I think there were some things that they really hit well in the second season. I also feel like they tried, while they had the stage, they tried to get all their deeper social messages out in the first season while they had the microphone. And then they went in the second season and did some more of the ethical sort of human experience episodes. I think if they had mixed the two, they probably would have had more success. But I don't fault them for doing what they did, and I liked it anyway myself. But I just think they probably would have caught less heat had they approached it differently.
Yeah, probably. But like that's just the decision they made. And I want to go back and watch everything because I haven't seen all the episodes. But like the handful I saw, I had some mixed feelings about it because I'm also a big fan of the original series. I haven't seen every episode of the original series, but I really have a great love and appreciation for it. And to kind of cap this off, like talk to me a little bit about how Rod Serling has inspired the way you create because I'm really curious about that.
I think Rod Serling taught me that you can have a voice when it comes to the ethical topics of the day. It is your job, particularly as a white person, to speak for people of color, to bring light to issues, even if they're uncomfortable, not just for white people, but for anyone to
Yeah.
discuss, to provide as much, cover and comfort to people of color in your circle of industry as you possibly can, but also to speak to the bigger issues or biggest issues that bring all of us together, which are mortality, the value of your life, living life to the fullest, caring about other people, um, all of those things, having a sense of history, like all of those things are baked into Twilight Zone episodes, whether Serling wrote them or not, because there were other great writers on that series like Walter Johnson and Charles Beaumont and Earl Hamner. Um, among others, Richard Matheson, of course. And so, like, you know, all of that series sort of had that. And you know, I would suggest to anybody that does like the Twilight Zone that's listening, go back if you haven't and listen to you can get them on YouTube or whatever, of Rod Serling's speeches. He gave speeches to colleges a lot in the early 70s where he talked about film, but he also talked about social issues that were going on at the time. And I would, you know, he really helped me find a voice for a lot of those things and navigate my way into being a more proactive person that you know, comes at that in the right way. And like I said, also like the mortality issues and just like living life fully and valuable and valuably. Those are all so much in there, you know, episodes like The Hunt, so many more, you know, like those are, you know, some great things that he put out there and that I've taken with me. You know, the Twilight Zone isn't about, you know, it used science fiction. It's also important to, I'll say this real quick so we can get out, but like, you know, Serling wrote a lot of non-science fiction before the Twilight Zone. He actually won, I think, 4 Emmy Awards for teleplays before the Twilight Zone even aired.
Oh, wow.
And he won for teleplays like Patterns, Requiem for a Heavyweight. He also wrote something called Velvet Alley that's really important. And those are dramas, you know, and they're dramas from the 1950s. You can find them on YouTube. You can find them on like kind of knockoff DVDs on Amazon and stuff. If you're really into Rod Serling and you're listening, go and check those out. You know, they are from the 50s. They are a little stiff compared to today's television. But if you're into film history and even into American history and how television helped shape sort of the social conversation as the 50s and 60s progressed, like Rod Serling's early 50s work is really important. Patterns is a story that, just to give you a quick example of how non-science fiction this is, it's a story about a guy who gets recruited by like a mortgage company or something. And he's recruited in from Ohio. He flies in, comes to New York, relocates. He works for this company, and finds out after a few weeks that he's there to replace this very loyal older employee that had been there for a long time, and that the boss is actually really evil and just wants to fuck this old guy over and get him out so that he can get a new person in. And his moral conflict with being put in that situation. That sounds rather dry, but in 1955, that was such an anti-conformist kind of message to like put into like mainstream television. And that was his first Emmy, and it just shows the depth of like what Serling could do, you know, beyond science fiction. Not that there's anything wrong with science fiction either.
Right, but you know, like he managed to apply his perspective and philosophy to so many different kinds of art that it just shows how much range he had, and like that makes, you know, like that's even more of an incredible story. So you know, like it just adds to the appeal of what he did with the Twilight Zone. So that's definitely worth considering. And like, yeah, shout out to Rod Serling, because Twilight Zone is fucking amazing. Like,
yeah.
Well,
definitely.
Yo, NASA, we went through some crazy technical issues get this done, but like, bro, thank you so much. This was really enlightening and super tight. So like, thank you for taking the time, man.
No problem, man. Thank you very much for having me on. I'm really, you know, it's dope to be able to talk about film and culture and music like this. Like, you know, this is the kind of stuff that I do with people all the time. So that's awesome.
Thanks for listening. Shout out to y'all for making it this far. And shout out to all the Black people listening too, because y'all really impeccable. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell a friend to come through next time. 1.